I think we often feel like we don't have any say or any control. All of these industries, all of these large workplaces, they're much more powerful than we are as individuals. And yet, amidst these, we do have individual agency. And so you can look at a task list and say, what do I have to do? What actually can I delegate? What do I not need to do because it really is not bringing me joy?
Welcome back to another episode of the Doctors and Dollars podcast. As always, I'm your host, Nate Crannell. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Resa Lewiss, an emergency medicine physician, leader in point-of-care ultrasound, and co-author of MicroSkills, Small Actions, Big Impact. She's a pioneer in breaking down complex tasks into small, agreeable steps and empowering people to create meaningful change in their work and their lives. Today, we're going to be diving into strategies that can help anyone, whether you're in medicine, business, or just everyday life, boost your efficiency and your well-being. Welcome, Dr. Lewiss.
Thanks so much for having me. It is great to be with you.
Awesome. I love that. I'm going to dive right in if you're good with that.
Ready.
Awesome. We are at a podcast. You wrote a book all about really the human interaction. If I had to summarize it in the best way, how to be super efficient with human interaction. I think the most important thing there is communication. Good communication is critical, especially when time is limited. In your book, like when you're talking about micro skills and especially around communication, how can busy individuals improve their communication with their colleagues, with their clients, with patients, even family members in such a in fast-paced environments?
Great question. And I want to just touch on something you mentioned about just being a good human. We actually, my co-author and I were on a podcast, and the podcast host said, why didn't you just title the book How to Be Nice? Which I also thought was a very strong endorsement and reaction. And, mission accomplished, your thought that like we really tried to write something that was comprehensive, that would speak to many people across industries, no matter age, no matter stage. Specific to the communication, we have one of our 10 chapters is MicroSkills for Polished Communication. And we touch on a lot of things. Some things are obvious, like literally in terms of speaking, but some are less obvious probably to the audience that hasn't read the book. We talk about body language. We talk about email, and email gets a lot of interest because we think we're all good at email. Like we do it. Every single industry I know of involves email. But there are actually aspects of email that we don't even think about because it becomes such a part of the culture. And quite honestly, that cultural aspect can be contributing to burnout and toxicity and is not always the most efficient communication. So for example, we had written an article, and that article made it into this book about compassionate email. And people are like, compassionate? How is there anything about email that can be compassionate? But what we posited, and I wanted to use the word posited right there, is that, we all think about inbox zero for ourselves. And we said, why don't we flip the script 180? Rather than thinking about yourself and your inbox, how about thinking about the other people, their inbox? And how can you be compassionate towards your email and what you write and how you send it and when you send it? And I'll just give one example. I definitely subscribe to the, send an email when I write it, or when I have something to get off my chest or an idea to put down, write it, send it. And, emergency physicians work at all hours, all days, nights, weekends, holidays. And so I thought people would just sort of understand, well, she's an emergency doc, she's working right now. And I didn't think it mattered. And I thought they would be able to say, oh, this isn't not something I need to address right now. I can address this later. But I was leading a team, and one of my team members said to me, Resa, when you send emails on Saturdays, I get really stressed. I know I don't have to address it right then and there, but the fact that you are my supervisor and you're sending me an email on a Saturday, I do feel like I have to open it up and look at it. And I'm more likely to actually work on it right then and there, even if there's no timeline that I have to. And I was so appreciative of that feedback. I had never thought that just sending the email when I wanted to would cause stress. But there is evidence to say that in terms of compassionate email culture, we recommend that people schedule those sends. So go ahead and write the email, get the task off your mind, get, the thought off your chest. But, if it's email, it's probably not emergent. And if it's emergent, email is probably not the right medium. So write the email, but schedule the send. And almost every software that we're all using for email has that schedule send option. I try to do that can't say I do it 100% of the time, because someone like, oh, this can go on a Saturday or Sunday, or I know my friend is always working on Sundays, so it's okay. But in general, that has completely been well received, and it just feels respectful.
So as you're writing that, and that's really good point to start out the conversation is just being compassionate for the other people receiving that. Are you writing that thought then as it's fresh in your mind, let's say at 9:00 at night? Are you writing it as, hey, good morning, here's my thought, my idea, and then you like schedule to send it at 8 a.m.? Or how are you structuring the actual, the language or the tense, I guess you could say, of that email if it's going to be future sent?
I love that question because it's all anticipating how it's going to read. I use the example, like you and I are recording this podcast, but say it comes out in 6 months. I'll be like, oh, it's so great to be speaking to you in September. I may not timestamp it. So similarly with the email, I am careful, rather than saying good evening, blah, 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 blah. If I know it's going to be received by them at 9 a.m, I'll either say a generic salutation, or I might say good morning. But yeah, I try to time it in that way. Or, say we meet today and I send you a follow-up email tomorrow. It goes to your inbox tomorrow, but I write it today. I'll be like, thanks for our meeting today. I might say, thanks for our meeting yesterday. So I really try to make it consistent, because otherwise the people are like, that's kind of odd. Why is this timing so off?
Absolutely. How do you manage the communication when the email is going to, let's say, your whole team? Maybe not just that one team member that gave you some good feedback, but you're sending it to 10 people at once, and there's different levels of communication that is received. I know just in leading teams in the past, you have like the strong go-getters, you have kind of the timid people on the side, you have the one that's always willing to raise their hand, you have the one that never really wants to do anything. Communication styles are differently. How do you structure an email when there's multiple communication styles being received?
Yeah, it's a really insightful question. And I too have been on teams that have had completely opposite preferences. So for example, I worked at a hospital for an academic emergency medicine group, and the culture there was CC everybody, because everybody's in and out, different hours. So it was just sort of understood that the supervisor wanted to be on everything to be able to follow along with the conversation. That was really the workplace culture. I moved from that job to another job, a new institution. And when I CC'd people to keep them in the loop, to have them be able to follow the conversation, the person in my 2 line got very self-conscious and said to me, Resa, why are you CCing people? Almost like I was trying to catch them or embarrass them, or had some sort of nefarious, I want to use that word, nefarious intent, but I actually didn't. It was literally to keep everybody in the loop so that they could passively follow along rather than actively follow along. And I share those 2 stories because every team is different. Every workplace culture is different. And in fact, we have a whole chapter on MicroSkills for workplace culture. But I think it's important to speak with the team and ask, what are people's preferences? Or say you're the supervisor, you can kind of set the expectation or set the tone. But also, I think it's important to actually have, a radically honest, transparent conversation about, how do we as a team want to communicate via email? Because people have really strong feelings about email. To your point about like a large team, another thing that came to mind, which is an email tool, we all know there's a 2 line. Everybody listed there receives a copy. And when they reply, everybody on that 2 line gets a copy. Same thing with everybody on the CC line. CC stands for carbon copy. One of the more secretive tools, which isn't so secretive, we just need to get to know it better, is BCC, blind carbon copy. And my co-author and I talk about how we definitely have seen it used in a weaponized fashion. It's used to get someone in trouble. It's used to like let the supervisor know what this, bad actor is doing, or to start creating a paper trail. And we really strongly feel, and this goes back to why this book maybe should be called How to Be Kind, that is not the way to use BCC. BCC
Right.
should be used kindly and respectfully. And just one example, say you do have a large team and everybody's coming to the holiday party. There's going to be a holiday get together and you're asking everybody to bring a dish to that holiday party. And you're in charge. Hi, everybody, please, respond and let me know what you're going to bring. Well, say there are 50 people. There is no need for everybody to know what everybody's bringing, probably just the person organizing and keeping the list.
Right.
So what we would do is say, hi, everybody. The whole team is in BCC. This would be the content of the email. Please respond to me and let me know what you're bringing. So then you, as the organizer who needs to keep a list, the organizer who's keeping the track of what everybody's bringing will have a list, will get all the emails, but the 50 others in the BCC don't need to receive that email to their inbox.
Right. They don't have the reply all option as a BCC member, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Very good. Even thinking about communication before I shift gears on you, let's talk about I call it interpersonal communication. Like we're talking one-on-one, face-to-face. That happens a lot. I mean, not as much as it used to since COVID, and business parks are half empty now. But a lot of people get overwhelmed with not only the endless emails, but like just the endless meetings, like just having to go from boardroom to boardroom and have these meetings. What are some strategies that you guys talk about in the book to help busy individuals manage the demands of all these meetings while not sacrificing being effective or sacrificing poor collaboration?
Yeah. I love this question because I think all of us feel like we have no control. We all have workplace cultures that really value meetings, and they don't just value meetings, they value 1 hour meetings. So we look at our days and our calendars, and sometimes it's like just chock full of meetings. And the thought is, how am I going to get any of my work done? Or like I don't have any me time, or am I going to have time to eat? Can I get up, stretch my legs, and go for a walk out in nature? So our chapter 1 is MicroSkills for self-care, and we actually talk about meetings and meeting culture. And as probably the listeners can tell by now, there's a big overlap with a lot of these MicroSkills, self-care, being a good team member, polished communication. And we actually advocate to really look at meetings and think, does the meeting really, really need to be an hour? Because we think that 60-minute meetings can often be 30-minute meetings. 30-minute meetings can probably be 15 to 20-minute meetings. 15 to 20-minute meetings could maybe be an email or a quick text or a quick phone call. In other words, everything doesn't have to be a 1 hour meeting. There are certain meetings certainly that are required and we need to do as a part of our roles and responsibilities. However, we also think that sometimes you can just work in a cloud, off a cloud-based document. You and I were talking about Google Documents. I have no affiliation with Google, but I do like Google Docs. I love working off a live document. You don't have to worry about sending back and forth to make sure you have the most updated draft, but it's a way of getting work done and even communicating without having to sit in a meeting, without, picking up the phone. It's a really, really good way to get projects to move forward. The other thing about meetings is we talk about crowdsourcing them. And if you sort of buy into this concept that after a good night's sleep, restful sleep, you wake up refreshed and most focused and most able to get your actionable work and sort of the tasks that require the most brain time, you want those in the morning. So we talk about actually moving meetings to the afternoon if they are meetings where you can be a little bit more of a passive participant and don't require that focused energy brain time. Finally, we talk about planning like your week such that, say you are a mentor and you want to dedicate time to be able to meet with mentees. You can actually say, you know what, Friday afternoons are my mentee time. And each week you have a 2-hour block, so 4 30-minute meetings that are open to mentees. And once those blocks get filled, that's it. next week is the next time that someone can sign up. So sort of really scheduling your meetings if they have a purpose and they're under your control so that you can protect your other time to do the deliberate practice that actually moves projects forward and gets the work done.
How do you best manage your calendar? You have multiple irons in the fire, I guess you could say, with what you do professionally and obviously with the book and things like that. What are one or two things that you do to successfully manage your calendar that maybe someone might not know?
I feel guilty and called out that you are not wrong, that I do love being organized and being efficient. And, I'm always reading about how to do things better. And I personally try to keep everything on one calendar. And I color code. So, you can create calendars within your calendar.
Same.
And I color code. And it's fun to play with colors, number one. But also it just really helps structure and look at the day. I do block out time and I do the scheduling writing, for example, or scheduling exercise. Sometimes I don't write every single thing down, but I know that like my morning is protected for, or, I don't like to start my meetings in the morning until a certain time so that I can get some of my morning rituals done and some of my deliberate practice work done. So color coding, blocking out time, and I'm trying to think of one more that I like. I like playing with the different functionalities of repeating events, or this doesn't feel work related, but it kind of is. Birthdays. When there's someone important to you and you know their birthday, put it on the calendar, and then there's a repeat every year functionality, which is so easy. But I will tell you, I have a lot of people who are like, that's so amazing that you, it's so amazing that you remember my birthday. And yeah, but it's also like scheduled on my calendar and it repeats annually. So, I don't feel like that's that hard to do.
Yeah, maybe not. And I kind of, to be honest, I leverage Facebook a little bit. And when it comes to birthdays, I actually just texted a doctor, an anesthesiologist down in Houston that I know this morning today's his birthday. And I just, like 7 a.m. this morning, I know he's a busy guy throughout the day. So I just said, hey, happy birthday. Hope your family spoils you today. And his response back was not only thank you, but it was like, how did you remember that it was my birthday? I was like, well, Facebook, and you're just somebody who is important to me. And I thought I'd let you know. But it's wild what a birthday text or just a quick reminder like that once a year can mean to someone.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely. Wonderful. The book is called MicroSkills, but it's all about breaking down big tasks into small, manageable actions. Like, what are one or two things that you think if you had to give like the Reader's Digest version of this book to someone maybe who hasn't read a lot of books? We talked about that offline, how we've read a lot of books similar to this, self-improvement and things like that. If there's somebody who hasn't read, that kind of literature before, what are one or two things that you would summarize? Like, hey, here's some of the most important micro skills that for something that feels like a big task that you want to bring down into small, manageable actions. What are some of those pieces that you would share with them?
I think the Reader's Digest edition would start with actually introducing the reader to, why we wrote this book and why we really think it can speak to them. And so my co-author and I have both had the experience, some overlapping, almost exact stories and some very different stories of starting our first job, being at work, or even going through the medical school to residency to fellowship to first job as a faculty member experience, and somehow looking around and feeling like everybody else seems to know how to do this and we don't. And almost like there was a playbook. And I was like, how do they know how to do that? Or how are they getting all their papers published? Or how are they getting awards? Like, how does all this work? And so we wrote the book that we wish we had been given. And, we start as a framework, 3 truths. We introduce it at the introduction, and we actually close it with those same 3 truths. Number 1, time can only be spent. And we want everybody to think of their own time as a currency. So we want people to be thoughtful about how they spend their time, with whom they spend their time. And we think it's worthwhile to spend their time with this book because we tried to write an efficient read that would really, catapult them into learning how to break those big projects, big tasks, habits that they think are actually naturally born to some people, but not to others, which we don't believe, to just make them feel achievable. The next is that the world is not equal. And we're saying, listen, we know you may not have the same pedigree. You might have not have the same resources, the same inherited wealth, the same time. So these micro skills, by learning them and working them into your behaviors, you're going to help level your own playing field so that you do feel like you're in line with everybody else. And finally, we say that learning is limitless if only accessible. So sort of a caveat is only the people that are going to pick up and want to read this book are the people that are open. They have a growth mindset. They want to be better. So, with that framework, people are like, oh, okay, I think this book could help me. And that was sort of how we designate what we wrote compared to some of the many books that are out there, that we actually break it down into the how-to. And that goes back to the micro part, like these little critical actions that people can integrate real time. So I gave the email example about, okay, scheduling your email. You're like, I can start doing that today. We talk about, I'll bring up in chapter 1, self-care, because I really feel many industries don't value it. They don't talk about it. They don't model it. They don't laud it, all the things. And medicine is certainly one of the worst in this way. In the emergency department, we often worked places where there was no scheduled time and no time to eat. You never called out sick if you were sick. And also, it's sort of this badge of being strong if you don't need to sleep. And you can work a full overnight shift, not sleep, and then be in a whole day of meetings. And it's sort of, it's really not health oriented to think that way, especially when, for example, with sleep, there are many sort of cases of people getting into car accidents and even some very lethal outcomes due to falling asleep at the wheel. Funnily, I used to live in New York City, and I share a story that if I sat down on the subway car, that was just danger, because I often woke up in Queens and missed my stop in Manhattan. So anyway, we have a chapter, and I think this one is really helpful to everybody, of developing subject matter expertise. What does that mean? Well, who the heads of your field are. You know them because, well, perhaps they're published. Perhaps they're the ones speaking at a conference. Perhaps they're the ones who, you see on radio or podcasts or TV. And so we talk about how people can develop subject matter expertise. And that just seems like large and looming. And we actually break down and say, you can start by reading books. You can start by listening to podcasts. You can start by tuning into webinars. You can start by learning to meet those experts by reaching out by email, reaching out to them on social media. They're going to be at a national conference speaking. See if you can arrange a coffee meeting at that national conference. So we give all sorts of really practical, small ways to, in this example, develop expertise by writing, by speaking, by connecting with people who are more advanced or more experienced or older in the field. And by networking and connecting with them, they can, basically bring you in and onto some of their projects. You can maybe partner with them, or you can invite them to come speak at your shop. And then all of a sudden you have more of a professional relationship with this person that you can reach out to them for advice.
Yeah, create a mentor, right? And I mean, you're a mentor to other folks. Like, I'm sure some of that came from networking that you mentioned just a second ago. Like, networking, it seems like just another task that you have to do, and it's like a never-ending thing that you have to continually do. But it's crucial to growth, right? To your point, if you're going to grow and become a subject matter expert, networking has to be a part of your skill set. That you've got to nurture and build that muscle of networking to be able to do that, because building some of those meaningful connections. Those are going to be not only impactful to your business or what it is that you're doing, but like some of those could be long-term friendships that just become very important people in your lives that if you didn't network, if you didn't take that chance, right? Maybe you're a little introverted and or you had limited time to do some of the things that you just mentioned. That could be a step back in where you're wanting to go if you don't network and if you don't take some of those chances.
Could not agree more. And in fact, I feel like you teed me up to talking about networking for introverts, because that's actually one of the MicroSkills we discuss. So for listeners that are about to read the book that haven't read it, we actually have another chapter on MicroSkills for networking. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's exquisitely important. And maybe not something we're told when we're early on, although there are ways that we're introduced to it. Like perhaps in college, you were part of a fraternity or a sorority, or, my father was in the Lions Club. And I just thought I wasn't actually interested in the Greek system, but as I developed in my career and kind of aged in, I was like, oh my gosh, that's why some of these groups exist. It creates a network, because I know, like, for example, I'll use the example of a fraternity or sorority. Those people become people that you're connected with for life, with whom you network, who can help you professionally. Same thing with like a Lions or an Elks or a fill in the blank. And so I actually found some of that help in networking by going to my college alumni club in the city I was living in. So I had gone to Brown University undergraduate, and I was in New York City for 12 years. And I found myself trying to figure out some of these professional journey efficiency pathways. And I read about networking, and I was like, Resa, you loved college. Why don't you go to the alumni club from your college? And I did. I joined the Brown Club of New York, and I started attending their events, finding my people, and having some really positive experiences. Now, you and I both know that networking sounds sometimes cringy. And so rather than saying networking, I say connecting. But you and I are on the same page. It's absolutely crucial to professional success. And back to the, introvert part, there are ways to connect with people that don't overwhelm or zap your energy like many networking events do. And we talk about this in the book. You can create one-on-one sort of connections rather than staying in, if you're going to your professional national conference, which can be loud and full of parties and, like lots of people in a room where, to be honest, I don't know, introvert or extrovert, I think it's hard for anybody to really establish a connection that sticks. But basically creating opportunities for, rather than being in the room of 50 to 100, why not create a dinner where 4 of you sit down and have a normal conversation, where then you've developed an experience of sharing a meal and probably professional connections that will now more likely stick.
Absolutely. And for someone who's introverted, that seems step one of that then is still approaching that person and saying, hey, I'd like to put together a dinner of 3 or 4 people. Would you join me? That ask could be very strenuous for them. But like they're eventually, like I was talking about building that muscle earlier, like do that enough times and the ask will be the easy part. And then you still have that comfort of like, hey, I can still be a little introverted, still create these dinners with more meaningful conversations and more meaningful connections. I think that's the biggest part. Is step one is the ask, because anybody can walk into a giant room of a couple hundred people and try and walk up to someone and talk to them. But that could be the hard part, right? For some. So if you can take out that extra layer of hundreds of people, makes it a little bit easier.
I was going to say the cold ask can even be, sort of taken down a notch in terms of stressful by, say you have a good personal, professional connection with someone who's a mentor. You can ask your mentor to introduce you, or you can attend a networking event with your mentor. And so just by passively walking around the room with your mentor with whom you have established trust and comfort, they can introduce you to someone. Next thing you know, you're introduced to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new people.
I am super excited to introduce to you the Doctors and Dollars 5-Day Financial Challenge. I'm Mike Neubauer, I'm CEO of Grand Vision Companies, and I'm the one that you see on the Wealth Wednesday and Daily Dollar episodes with Nate. So Nate and I are partnering again to do something even more exciting, which is the 5-Day Challenge. We're taking the best of all of our episodes, all of our expertise and knowledge, and we're condensing it into an impactful and purposeful 5-day presentation, 1 hour per day, for 5 days, to give you everything you need to build that foundation for your financial future. So if you're looking to gain the pieces, you want those puzzle pieces and find out how they fit in your financial plan, head over to the Doctors and Dollars website, join us on the 5-day challenge. We're putting it together for free, so you got nothing to lose. We look forward to seeing you on the inside.
You segued me perfectly into my question. So it's almost, we got a good vibe here going, but reputation, a mentor of yours that's going to be able to introduce you to several people, a reputation comes with that. It's something that, takes time to build, whether you're in the workplace or in, personal circles. Building a reputation is really important. What are some small actions that people can take to ensure that they're nurturing a positive reputation over time?
Yeah. We say that it's very hard to build a really good, trustworthy, respected reputation. It's very easy to develop a bad reputation, and the bad reputation develops much more quickly than the good reputation. So some straightforward do's, don't do's. We suggest don't lie, which sounds obvious, but we, for example, work in the emergency department in an environment where there's a lot of expectation, and it's not uncommon for someone in training to report to the faculty member and tell them about a patient. And then the faculty member always has questions. And as a trainee, there's no way you've covered every single question, nor would you be able to anticipate what your faculty member is going to ask you. And so, the faculty members said, well, did they get their flu shot this year? And there's a big temptation that some trainees will fall into and say no, even though they didn't ask. And then the faculty member goes into the room and says to the patient, I'm really glad you got your flu shot this year. The patient will be like, I didn't get a flu shot. And the faculty's like, oh, the trainee said you got your flu shot. No, I never got my flu shot. And they didn't ask me about it. So we give that kind of example of just don't lie. Just be honest. Yeah. I forgot to ask, or I didn't ask. I will as soon as we finish our conversation. But there's such a temptation to, show your expertise or show that you didn't mess up, or you want to make a positive impression. But so that's an obvious one. Going back to email culture, we talk about not ghosting. I think this concept of ghosting, which is, not responding or just, dropping the communication loop. Some people think it's generational. I don't know that I buy into this whole generationality, but just that it's sort of about skills of communication that are taught and known versus not taught, not known. So we always recommend closing the loop and responding, and not just, not responding to work-related emails. Sure. Tied into this concept of timelines, if you are on a project with a group and you're supposed to get your piece completed, say you're running late, say there's no way, rather than just, again, not responding or not letting anybody know or letting that timeline pass, we really recommend being honest and being transparent and saying, I know my piece of the project is due on Friday. Apologies, I'm not going to be able to meet that timeline. It will be in your inbox, on your desks, Monday by 10 a.m. or something like that. Just sort of making a promise or making an acknowledgement that you're not going to meet what is expected, rather than waiting for everybody to just sort of passively find that out, and actually, committing to what you can get done with a reasonable timeline.
Absolutely. Goes back to that feedback that you received originally, which is just being a nice person. The book is all just about just being nice. And I think that's one of those, you essentially mentioned one of the 10 commandments, right? Don't lie. That just seems like a very obvious thing. It's that old saying, it takes years to build a good reputation, but it takes 5 seconds to destroy it. Right. And so all it takes is not giving the right response to your point of somebody saying lying, or just not asking, but not wanting to feel judged for missing something. And so they fill in that gap that they didn't fill with the right thing, with a lie or some type of omission that, can certainly, once that's found by a mentor, by whomever, it certainly can be detrimental to a reputation pretty easily.
Yeah. We talk even about vis-a-vis reputation, as people are getting promoted and moving up at their jobs, or say they're actually considering moving industries, companies, positions, that it's really important not to neglect your current duties and to actually either delegate or get it off your plate or somehow make sure that you don't ignore those responsibilities, because people will remember, what you did when you were exiting. And, your reputation and your network comes with you no matter where you go professionally.
Absolutely. One thing that kind of goes along with that is, as someone is building a reputation, whether it's early in their career, they switch, jobs, they're at a new place and they have to kind of rebuild their reputation. Constructive feedback. I think, being a manager in corporate America before, having managed my own team and had my own employees, constructive feedback can be easy sometimes, but it also can be very hard. It's just a tough process in general, whether you're the one receiving the feedback or giving it. How can a busy professional, a busy physician, develop that skill of receiving and applying feedback in a way that fosters growth without just being a jerk?
Yeah. No, I think the art of giving and receiving feedback is difficult, and there are many books written on feedback. And so there's two thoughts. One is, when you're talking about trying to get feedback because you want to be better, it can be overwhelming if you don't time who you're asking, when you're asking, how you're asking. So one of the processes to which we subscribe is the just one thing. Example I give is, you give a talk, you get off the stage, people are like, that was a great talk. And you're like, do they really think it was a great talk? Are they is it the niceties and the politeness? So a friend clued me into this, and I love this. When someone says that was a great talk, I'll be like, thank you. What's one thing? Is there one thing that really stood out to you, or one thing that worked? One thing you think I should make sure I do in my next time I give this talk? But, that is really helpful, that concrete specific, when they say that was a great talk, of hearing. Now, again, it's nice to hear nice things, but I really am, vis-a-vis the growth mindset, I'm always trying to be better. Now, flip side, say you're the one giving feedback. And I share a story in the book of when I decided to give feedback without preparing the person. It wasn't really the right scenario either. So I think, because we are all sensitive beings trying to do our best on a daily basis, and we're all works in progress, learning, growing, etc. I think it's really important to prepare not just the other person, but also yourself. So what does that look like? Preparing the other person is, number one, letting them know that you want to have a feedback discussion. Like, that's what you're going to cover at the meeting, or that's why you want to speak to them by phone. Letting them know, what you want to focus on, that it's going to be feedback. If you can even be specific and, I want to give you feedback on your performance over the last quarter, but like being specific so you're not catching them off guard. Making sure that, it's a time and a place and a medium that's comfortable for them and for you. So maybe a phone is not the right way to do it. Maybe in person is the right way. Say in person is not possible, well, then at least virtual, so that you can see each other. And there's this element of reading body language and reading emotion. One thing I talk about is it gives all of us a little bit of like pause and stress to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this difficult feedback session because the person's not performing, or there have been some timelines missed. So this goes back to one of my favorite aspects of building up your MicroSkills and being better, and that's building up and tapping into your personal board of directors. Now, some people might know what that means, some people might not, but it's kind of like what it sounds like. It's not literally a board where people have signed on and have term limits, etc. But these are the people that are your go-to people. You trust them, and they are invested in your professional success. So we talk about, if you're going to have a difficult conversation, call up one of your board members, one of the people that are your go-to people who you really trust, and say, hey, can I practice a conversation with you? Can we role play? And I role play a lot. I think it's, number one, it's kind of fun and funny because you're making fun of role playing, but actually you're not making fun of it because you're actually doing it because why? It works. And I promise when you role play, then the conversation goes so much better than it would have had you not done that. So when giving feedback, I would never underestimate the power and the help that role playing can give.
When you're role playing, do you let's say you go to one of your peers that you know is going to help you practice, if you will. Do you give them any context? Do you say, hey, here's the type of feedback that I'm going to be given? Or is it you kind of try and leave them in the dark so that as you can almost test giving the feedback cold to someone, and then they have to kind of react, because then you're not giving it cold to the actual person that needs the feedback. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Almost always I've given context for them to even say, yes, sure, I'll be your role play partner. But I might then fine tune it. Like, say I do the scenario and they're like, that was horrible, or that was great, or, you made me feel bad. I might then fine tune it and say, here's my goal. My goal of this conversation is this person knows this, and knows that, that we're going to be meeting regularly. Like, I think it is helpful to let them know what your goals of the conversation are, so then they can give you the feedback of how you're coming across.
Yeah, that's good. What's feedback look like, or what are some of those feedback conversations you've had, within the emergency medicine side of what you do? Are these with nurses? Are these with, to your point, trainees? Maybe that new person that just joined that isn't quite familiar with all the inner workings of your clinic. What are some of those feedback conversations like in the healthcare space?
Yeah, and they're similar to, anybody that has someone that's more junior to them, or they're training them up, or they've just joined a team. It is usually, trying to be open-ended, trying to gauge where they are and how they feel. If it's a generic, like just general check-in, and we actually talk about that in our chapter on feedback on starting meetings with a check-in. And this is sort of adjacent to what you just asked, but what I'll say is it's all related to psychological safety. Like, not only does it go better when they trust you and you trust them, but they understand that you don't have ill intent. You actually have positive, helpful intent. So this thing called a check-in is something we do at meetings, where we start a meeting by going around and everybody, quote, checks in. And this is often the context I've used it is when there's a regular standing meeting and we're all going to be seeing each other on a regular basis. And the check-in is essentially what's happened since the last time we've seen each other. And certainly it can be a work-related check-in, but it can even be a personal check-in. And ours would often become I tried out this restaurant, or, I went to that concert, or, that hard conversation that I was worried about, it went really well. It can be anything. But this element of getting to know each other, and that builds trust in terms of all of us as round humans with all sorts of things going on in our lives. So a lot of times, though, on shift in the emergency department, you're working with someone just once and then you'll never work with them again. So there's a little bit of establishing rapport in terms of like the goals for the day. One of the things we say is we can, with our trainees, say, what would you like to work on today? So say they're like, you know what, I really want to work on my interviewing patients to make sure that I'm getting better at getting their story. And so that then that gives me, as the person that's going to be giving feedback, something very focused that I can look at. So I think there's a common theme here of specificity that helps everybody.
Yeah, that's really good. The one thing I want to come back to, the last thing I want to talk about on feedback is the one thing that you talked about. So I think the scenario you gave is you gave a great talk, you came off stage, somebody says, hey, that was such a great talk. And you're like, well, what's one thing that you kind of took from that? Do you do it on the inverse? You're giving maybe constructive feedback that maybe isn't positive. Do you still say, hey, here's one thing you did well, though? Is that important?
Again, I think there's all sorts of formulas for the feedback. And I do think it's important to not just like pummel the person with negativity or with something that's going to make them feel bad. So I think there takes a sensitivity and trying to create that psychological safety. One thing I don't subscribe to, which is not what you suggested, but it is there's a positive, is something called the sandwich. And maybe you've heard of it, where you say something positive, you say like the negative feedback or the real source of your feedback, and then you end with something positive. People see right through that, and I see right through it. everybody's a little different in terms of, again, their sensitivity, their personality. I would just rather have someone be honest, but in their honesty, they're saying it kindly. And I do think, and that's the difficulty in giving feedback, how can you get your point across, be honest, and be kind?
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's possible, but I think that's the hard part of it, which is why role playing and practicing with people you trust who are going to say, Resa, that wasn't very well said, or that wasn't very nice, or like, what, is that what you want them? Or, someone that's really going to, I use the word poke holes, but poke holes and make you better so that then you're even better when you sit for the conversation. So the just one thing I do another one called start, stop, continue. This particularly works well when you think the person giving you feedback may not be comfortable generally giving feedback, or not comfortable giving feedback to you. My example is I wanted to get feedback from one of my team members who, in terms of job description, I was the supervisor. So, a lot of people aren't going to be honest with their supervisor. They don't feel like truly they can be honest with their supervisor. And so I could tell it was very difficult for this person to give me honest feedback. And I trusted this person. I knew this person would have valuable things to say. So I started something called start, stop, continue. And I didn't come up with this means of feedback, but it's one of the ways I've read about, where I would say, what's one thing I should start? What's one thing you think I should stop doing? And what's one thing you think I can continue and should continue? And that allowed this person to be like, I love it when you do this, keep doing this. When you do that, it's not great. I don't think people really enjoy it. So, stop that. And start is basically giving this person the opportunity to be like, I know that you have the ability to do blank. So, have you ever thought about starting this? And actually, number one, it's an amazing way to get ideas from other people and to have them input and be a part of your initiatives. But also tells you to really look at the things that you thought were going well that may not be going over as well as you thought. It's great. Start, stop,
Absolutely.
Continue.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. I'm gonna start using that in my feedbacks. But the start one is good just because it gives you a chance to I want to say introduce, but also maybe reaffirm a skill that they have. And so it's kind of a subtle compliment in a way to be like, hey, I know you can do this, or I've seen you do this before. You should start. And then here's the feedback. I think it's a great way to incorporate a little bit of kindness in there, a little bit of a compliment before delivering what it is that you really want them to start doing, which is part of the feedback that you're trying to deliver. So I think that's awesome.
100%. Yeah.
For sure. A big one for you. You built this, I don't want to call it self-help, but the book in general is great. Like we've said a couple times, it's just about being a good human. But the other part of your world is in medicine, right? One of the biggest things, and it comes up every now and then in these podcast conversations, but talking about burnout. Burnout's very common. It's a very common challenge for many high-achieving professionals, but specifically physicians. Talk about in the book where you can relate to individuals and how they can incorporate within their daily routines just things that they can do to prevent burnout, but also maintain their energy and enthusiasm over a long period of time with what they're doing.
Yeah, it's a great question. And you speak with a lot of physicians, so and it turns out there was a recent survey of over 10,000 physicians, and the specialty that had the highest rates of burnout and depression, emergency medicine physicians. Mm-hmm. And so it's something that I've thought about, seen, and, you shared, I'm a podcaster as well, and I speak with a lot of people in healthcare, and I talk about some of the trauma of the work and what they do to mitigate the effects of that. And so that even emphasizes again why we wrote our chapter 1 as MicroSkills for self-care. And sure, it's physical, taking care of yourself, but it's more than that. It's actual mental health and health care. And that can mean, number one, making sure you get sleep and enough sleep. Mm. We talk about this concept. This is one of my faves, of deliberate rest. I read a book about rest and how many of us in all of our work, especially as educators, there's this concept of deliberate practice and actually applying what you learn real time and being an active learner. but that sort of deliberate practice needs to be balanced with deliberate rest. And I remember reading about it, I'm like, what the heck is that? Well, yes, it is sleep. And yes, it is taking naps, but it's also doing things like sharing a meal with loved ones, being in community. It's also walking in nature, because there's something about nature. It does something to us. It means reading, but not just always reading for work, but actually doing pleasure reading. These acts of deliberate rest help with the work and help with the deliberate practice. So you are energized, you're more efficient, and you're sort of abandoning this concept of always working, always burning the midnight oil. So I think, exercise, some of these things I think are just good for health in general. But I think also going back to that psychological safety and building a feeling of positivity amongst your teams. Another thing that people talk about a lot that I subscribe to is gratitude, and really finding opportunities to feel gratitude and also to express gratitude. There's a story I share in the book about a thank you note, and that many of us grew up being told by our parents, oh, you should write a thank you note. You should write a thank you note. But I talk about how I learned this concept of a thank you note. Yes, I had gotten a little bit of an exposure from my parents growing up, but then I read a book on finances and financial health, and that's another aspect of health that, if you're feeling financially strapped or stressed, or you have overwhelming amount of loans, that can contribute to burnout and depression as well. So we talk about financial health. And I was reading a book when I had just finished training about how to navigate all of my, financial, the debt that I had from going through all my schooling. And I read this book, and the author talked about sending thank you notes to the people in your lives that help you. And he recommended, for example, your dentist, for example, your doctor. But these aren't just performative. These are actually honest, like, thank you notes. And I started doing that. And so, for example, I sent a thank you note to my primary care doctor, and she was so touched. She told me that she always looks forward to getting my thank you note. And I'm trying to be very concrete. Like, when I was with you, I did not feel rushed, and you answered every single one of my questions. So try to give her exactly why, kind of that just one thing, like specifically, why am I thankful?
Sure.
But I think also letting people know how they've affected you. And the story I share in the book was just briefly, I was in training. We had a very sick patient, and I wasn't sure how to navigate the conversation with the family. The faculty member with whom I was working, we all went into the family room. He navigated this conversation. I was blown away with how well it went and how clearly, visibly, palpably relieved the family members were. So years later, I had the opportunity to have a very similar conversation, which I conducted. And the reason I knew how to conduct it was because I had witnessed him do it years before when I was still in training. So I conducted it, I think, successfully, as the family member thanked me the next day via the nurses, came down in fact to find me. I wasn't working, but said to the nurses, please make sure you tell her thank you. And I ended up writing a thank you note to that original faculty member who modeled the conversation. And he was shocked because it had been years. And he told me that he held on to that thank you note, and still to this day, he takes it out every once in a while to read it.
Oh, it's momentous, I guess, right? You've recalled a certain feeling in them that one time that meant a lot, to then, I guess, refer back to that note over and over again, even for something that was years prior. So it's like you're bringing up an old feeling from something that happened even further in the past, which is such a unique psychological thing to do. Thank you notes are good. I like those.
Yeah.
Very cool. Burnout. I think as I asked the question, and then as you were talking, the one thing I kept thinking back to in my mind is that first truth that you mentioned earlier, that time can only be spent. I just really think burnout is they have competing priorities, right? They don't prioritize things well. They put maybe things that don't really matter that much ahead of things that do. And then they find themselves spending a lot of time doing things that they don't enjoy. And I've heard from a lot of different physicians, that's really where their burnout came from, is I went from spending a lot of time with patients to now not spending a lot of time with them, much more time doing things I don't enjoy doing, and that's what leads to burnout. And so, if time can only be spent, one of those micro skills might just be how to build your priorities in the right way that really affect your time positively, and push aside the things that don't bring you joy, right? That may be necessary, but don't necessarily bring you joy, to be able to have your priorities in line with your mental health. Would you agree with that?
Not only would I agree with it, I'm smiling because you're teeing me up. There's a chapter,
Okay.
micro skills for managing your task list. And like you hit it on the nail. Like many of us have FOMO, fear of missing out. And we talk about flipping that to JOMO, joy of missing out. But we always feel like we're going to get behind, or we're going to miss out on that magic opportunity, or that's the project that's going to get us ahead or get us to the position we're seeking. The other thing I will say is I think we often feel like we don't have any say or any control. And the one thing this book really emphasizes, and I think the reason we focus on the individual and what the individual can learn and do and integrate for their own behaviors in the workplace, is that we do have individual agency. All of these industries, all of these, large workplaces, they're much more powerful than we are as individuals. And yet, amidst these, we do have individual agency. And so you can look at a task list and say, what do I have to do? What actually can I delegate? What do I not need to do because it really is not bringing me joy? And I think that is actually difficult. I'm not saying that's easy to do, but we walk the reader through how to manage a task list because we're not necessarily given all those organizational skills, or, some people, by nature love being organized and kind of, that task, that habit comes easily, but we recognize that it's not obvious to everybody. So we say, listen, one is find out what are your priorities of your boss. That's got to get higher. What doesn't have a timeline until 6 months from now? Well, doesn't get the priority that's something that's due on Friday. And so that sounds obvious, but like really walking the reader through some of that minutia, the granular ways to approach it, can really sort of take off the cognitive load of, not knowing where to start, what to do, and feeling overwhelmed.
Absolutely. I think I'd add on to that. I think there's a lot of people who like to feel organized, or who will say that they are organized, but they're organizing the good and the bad together. Like they're just kind of making a list of all the things when there's a difference between being organized and prioritizing appropriately, I think. And so someone could have their calendar that just looks super nice and organized, but a lot of the things that they're doing within that calendar just aren't necessary. There's some of the 6 month down the road things that they're just misprioritizing.
Maybe that's on the calendar because that's what they love to do. So is there a way to actually start doing the things that you more love doing and moving away the things that actually you don't really love doing?
Yeah, no, great point. I always like to end my conversations with the same question. What do the next 5 years look like for Dr. Resa Lewiss?
Great question. I'm going to pause a minute and think.
Be personally, professionally.
I think, you and I had a great pre-meet conversation about lifestyle, medicine, and behavioral change. And I think for me, starting from even before now to the next 5 years, there's going to be a continued commitment to health and, lifestyle, behavior things that mean eating fresh, good food, movement and exercise, getting sleep, being in community, all the things that contribute to having a sort of a quality lifestyle. It's not about quantity in years, about the quality of the years that we're here. So I think I'm going to continue to double down on that commitment. I think also taking off what we just spoke on is that priority list is continuing to make sure to the best of my ability that what's on my to-do list, what's on my task list, what my work related items are as joyful as possible and doing what I really want to be doing rather than that feeling of have to be doing. And I think I'm going to, I'm one of those like always learning, always reading. And so I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Do you see yourself authoring another book in the next 5 years?
I do see myself authoring another book in the next 5 years. And it's probably going to be related to certain articles that I've written about healthcare and about the workplace. And I think the name of my podcast is The Visible Voices. And what I try to do is amplify the stories and the people. And I think, it's one of those, like, unconsciously, I've been talking to myself about amplifying my own voice and telling those stories.
That's good internal perspective that you have there of yourself, and you're right. Visible voices. You're out talking to a lot of great people and really amplifying the good things that they're doing in the world. And so maybe it is time for you to share your own story.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for that.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Yeah, I'm so glad that you took an hour out of your day to hang out with me, and I look forward to when our paths cross again in the future.
Likewise. Thanks for spending time with me.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you later, Resa.
Bye-bye.